Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Teryluz Andreu. I am a partner with Axialent, and I am very happy to be here with you today. We know you have a very busy agenda, and we really want to thank you for joining us, whether you're joining us on the live session or whether you're listening to the recording. We promise we'll make this a very good use of your time. If you're here, it could be three things. One, you really like Roberto and I, and you want to hear us talking for an hour. Two, you're very curious about culture, and you really want to know more about what is organizational culture and how can you manage it. Or three, maybe you're trying to drive business strategy or organizational change, and the beast you're trying to tame is called company culture. So we want to really make the session work for you. So we really encourage you to use the chat and share your reactions, share your questions. We're going to try to save some time at the end to go through those questions. And also at the end, we're going to be sharing with you some additional resources that we have created for you to really help you drive change and culture in your company. Culture and leadership is what we do best at Axialent. We really want to make sure that we give you some practical takeaways from this session. And in order to do that, today I'm thrilled to be joined by Roberto Di Bernardini, who is a true pioneer in transforming organizational culture and talent. Welcome, Roberto. And
hey, Terry.
Hey, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, he's joined us. Are you in London today, Roberto?
No, actually, I'm in Italy. Yeah, I'm Italian in Italy. Nothing fancy.
Italian in Italy. Well, thank you for joining us. So this is a truly global audience that we have. I'm seeing some of the names of the people that are joining us today. So we have a truly global audience. And I think that the topic of culture really resonates across all the different countries of the folks that are joining us today. So let me tell you a little bit about Roberto, because probably he will not say this himself, but I want to all of you know the wonderful experience and wisdom that Roberto has. So he has been at the forefront of redefining HR strategies at some of the world's leading companies, including Banco Santander, where he led a team of over 200,000 employees, driving innovative culture change and talent development, and setting a new benchmark for success. And then as CHRO of Danone, he championed initiatives in diversity, leadership development, and employee engagement at a global scale. And now Roberto has joined us at Axialent, and also he's advisory board member at PAC, which is a company that is really looking to shape the future of professional development by integrating coaching, mentoring, and AI into a truly transformative platform. So we have I have a great guest co-host today, because this is going to be more of a conversation about this very important topic. So, Roberto, I think we should start with why a lot of people join, which is that we heard this statistic from some other consulting firms that about 70% of change efforts fail. And many times, not that they fail, I would say probably they fall short, right? They don't turn out to provide the return on investment that they were supposed to provide when they were launched. And when we look at the research, a top culprit for that is company culture or leadership or both, right? So that's easy for me to say, because I am the consultant doing the assessments, right? And I go back to these teams and I said, well, this is the key reason why. It wasn't because of lack of systems, it wasn't because of lack of support or maybe resources. Many times it's just the way we do things, right? It gets in the way. But you're being on the other side. So when I leave the room, you're there and you are with your peers, with the C-suite, talking about the data that I just shared. So let's go behind the curtain. How those conversations go about, and what do they actually look like?
Thank you, Terry. So again, thank you for inviting me. I'm really passionate about this topic, and among others, I have been fortunate enough to lead two cultural transformation or cultural evolution. I don't like too much using transformation in two big companies. One is Banco Santander and the second is Danone. And we all know that it does not happen every day to have the possibility of evolving the culture of a company. First of all, a disclaimer, I'm Italian. For me, breakfast is a coffee with a cornetto. I never ate strategy, and I will not start doing this. So Terry, let's try to convince people that this is not a good thing to do. But when it comes to remaining, so your question is really interesting. We are left by consultant. We are in the executive committee room. What happened to make the change a success or the opposite? I would say there are three things that needs to be considered. The first one, which one of the reasons to move in the right or the wrong direction, the CEO and the leadership team see the value proposition of what we are about to implement. You need to realize that to evolve or to change something, a culture or a business strategy or something else, you need a lot of energy. So the fact that everyone in the room sees the value proposition for the change is a first ingredient to make this successful. If they are on the other path or a portion of the executive committee is not convinced, well, then you start to have a good ingredient for the failure. Mm-hmm. The second element, despite a good value proposition, despite a good plan, despite the good work done by Axialent and other consultants, the organization needs to be guided and convinced. When I say the organization, the levels below the executive committee needs to be guided, convinced of the change, because for them, it's a big undertaking. Eventually, these are people that have been using the same way of working, the same culture, the same behaviors for years. So the first question they will ask you is, explain us why. Why do we need to move now? And for this, you need to develop a very strong change management plan. Mm-hmm. Never bend on what you are saying. The first minute a member of the executive committee or a prominent leader in the company start to say, you know what, I'm not, well, the moment you start this sentence, you erase months of work, so never bend in the plan you implement. And then lastly, associate reward, recognition, and sanctions to the teams, to the individuals that are essentials for the plan. So reward the one that are walking the talk, and eventually convince the other or sanction the other that they are, making the change not happening. If you do all these, it is still not easy, but you have certainly a recipe for a good success.
Yeah, and I think that what you just described, Roberto, I've seen, like, if sometimes we go back in time, we always say that hindsight is 20/20, right? Those are the things that should happen, and with time we kind of learn and make sure that happens. But what about those people that probably didn't took those steps, right? And then you're having the conversation, so we're not moving at the speed we wanted, and this change is really not happening. How have you seen that conversation goes, and when do they put their finger finally on, oh, maybe culture is what's going on here? How have you seen that unfold, if you have seen it unfold?
So, David, the reason why there is this metaphor that we are stealing today of culture eating strategy for breakfast, it is probably exemplified for me in one data point. There are many data points, but one is really striking to me. If we all check, what is the number one reasons why CEOs lose their job? Intuitively, we may say, oh, it is bad financial results. Not at all. Not at all. It is probably number 2 or number 3. The number one reason why CEOs are ousted in a company are topics and issues related to culture and change.
Okay.
Culture sometimes is also related to misconduct, but it is cultural aspects. So if there are people that are still not convinced that this is an important topic, look at the statistics of why CEOs are losing their job. And then once you consider this and eventually you're convinced that it is it is a good or an important topic for a company, well, you need to realize that the business strategy is never forever. A business strategy changes every day. You see the word I'm using? A business strategy changes every day. There are moments where these changes are more rapid, and these are the moments where you need to stop and ask the ones that are reluctant, are we still fit for implementing the new business strategy? Mm-hmm. And there is one element. This is one of the ingredients I've used very deeply in Banco Santander and in Danone. You never have to be convinced by the fact that everything that is generated by the C-suite is the best thing possible. You need to involve the people down the stream. I remember that in both companies we did surveys. In Banco Santander that have seen 60,000 people. In Danone, 60,000 people participating to the survey. In Banco Santander, 100,000. We have asked them, this is the new strategy of the company. Do you think that our values, our behaviors, our purpose are still fit for? And the answer you have to this survey, which is food for thought for the leadership team, is 80% is okay, but let's talk about the remaining 20% that is creating friction. And this is the area that is offering you, the leaders, the opportunity to change. And then you have to apply what I referred before. Be consistent. Give you time, and then eventually you increase the chance to succeed. But we are here to talk about successes. Maybe we need to organize another call, and you invited me to, because I have also a lot of examples of plans that have started, and because of these things that have not been implemented, have failed miserably. Not because of the consultant. Most of the time, the responsibility is with the leaders that have not been thorough enough in going through the plan.
Yeah, and well, maybe we can dive into some of those things that went south, right? Because I think that many times in these conversations and in these webinars, to your point, we talk a lot about what went well, which I think it's important, but also when I've seen myself and also my clients learn the most is when things sometimes don't go the way we want it to, right? And that's when you need to have the tough conversations about why is that not happening. And that's a lot of actually the work we do, and people like you also, which are the internal facilitators of these conversations need to do. It's pause and say, hey, what's going on, right? And we need to accept responsibility when we, either as a consultant or as an executive, we're just not thinking about the things that we got to think about. And I think I'm just thinking, you make me think about a conversation I just had. I just hang up with one of my clients, and we were talking about precisely this. They've been on a journey to talk about culture transformation. They're trying to move into a more agile organization, and there's a lot of activities that have happened, but some of the executive team still feels that this is fluffy, right? That this is still abstract. Like when they talk about culture, it's still abstract. So what has worked for you in order to land this with your these are very smart people. If you're in the C-suite of a company like Danone or Santander or my client, they're extremely smart people. So it's not that they don't understand the concept of culture, I think. But I think they have a harder time kind of landing it to say, hey, how are we going to really do this? So what has worked for you in order to facilitate those conversations that you just talked about?
That's a great question. And the essential aha moment or the best aha moment I have had several times in my business life is when you are capable of linking what the business leaders consider the business and what we call culture. And fundamentally, Terry, I know I don't need to convince you, but fundamentally, the two things are the two phases of the same coin. You do not have a coin without the two phases, and you do not have a business without culture, and a culture can support a business. So the moment you are capable of convincing with examples that the business is doing well or not well because of cultural elements, because of the purpose you have, because of the behaviors you have, well, this is the moment where you have your business leaders on board, and eventually you can leverage their commitment. There is another thing in these haha moments, which I'm totally convinced of. Normally, the moment when we think it is time to go through a change management project is when things start to not go well.
Okay.
This is wrong. This is totally wrong. There is a mathematical link between these elements. Look, you have a business strategy, you need a change management plan, you need a culture to support the business strategy. And every time you adjust the business strategy, you need to ask yourself, do I have the right level of, do I have the right value, the right purpose, the right behaviors, the right archetypes to support the business strategy? If the business is doing super well, even if the business is not doing well. And if you start only on point B, it may be too late. And it may be complex to convince business leaders, because when you are going south, to restart going up, it is very complicated. So you start a change management program, a cultural program, and you say, yeah, but it is not working because we are continuing to go down. Well, this is because you have not started to look at the change you need when you have adapted your business strategy, when eventually you have evolved the business strategy. So it is not easy, but these two things, translate business strategy and think about the culture you need, and don't start when it is too late, are things to be considered to make sure that business leaders listen to what you are saying.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely you're right. And I think a side effect to that, Roberto, is what I called that sometimes culture is one of those topics or those words that become bad words, not because of the concept, but because there's been those false starts that you just mentioned, or maybe it started too late and people kind of the effort started and then they lost steam, and then it just becomes like a radioactive concept, right, or radioactive word. And I know I find myself sometimes in those situations that we're talking about culture, but we cannot even mention the word culture because it becomes a little bit of a radioactive conversation based on past history and past experiences. So what has worked for you in order for you, if you find yourself, my first question is, have you found yourself in that situation where, people were hesitant to even talk about culture, and what have you done to really help them have the conversation? Because it's still important, even if they don't want to call it that way.
Hey, have you heard the quote, "The culture is a poster in the wall"? So we normally say the culture is a poster on the wall when we see what should be the culture of the company on a wall that no one seen anymore. In the meeting rooms, you have these list of behaviors and values, but they are there and they are a poster in the wall. Well, this is when a company is not doing a good job from a cultural standpoint. They may continue to be a good job in a business standpoint, but I would say that the sustainability of the results they are having without the support of the poster, that should not be only a poster on the wall, but should be something we apply every day, will not be sustainable. One day, this will crash. So in my experience, there are 4 or 5 things that have been the ingredients of success and also insuccess when these have not been applied totally. Number one, you need the support of the executive committee and the CEO. The moment the executive committee and the CEO start to not talk anymore about the culture of the company, not practice the behaviors, the value, or even worse, start to doubt that this is the right thing, the plan is dead. You will not recover anymore. The second one, like I said before, don't rely only on the executive committee and the CEO. Start from the bottom. Ask the bottom, what are the frictions you are seeing? When you see the poster, do you see the poster applied? What are the frictions you are seeing? Because the people down the stream sees much better and much more what is happening in the organization. Identify when you do this analysis what you want to keep. Normally it is a large portion of your archetypes, values, behaviors, and identify the frictions and work on the frictions to identify what you can do to reduce this friction. Select some visible archetypes. I remember in Danone, for example, we started to say we need to put the fish on the table because the company was not collaborative enough, problems were hidden under the carpet. So we created an archetype, we distributed fishes in the company, and then we said, every time you have a problem, put the fish on the table. Things like these help to augment the culture. And the last two, be exemplary. The CEO needs to be the first spoken for the culture, the executive committee, every director, and do not bend. And the last, embed. I said this before. Embed in reward mechanisms and the people processes everything that is related to the culture. Both in Banco Santander and in Danone, we have changed the bonus and long-term incentive process, embedding elements of the culture to reward the one that were the best ambassador for the culture. So if you do all these, well, I think that the plans will go more likely in the right direction. And my experience in these two companies is that the programs have been very successful.
I love the idea of the fishes on the table. I think that we've done that with the elephants in the room, right? And there may be many different analogies. I've never heard of the fishes one. I don't know if that's an Italian thing, but I love it.
Can I give you another one? We
sure.
implemented the rule, this is in Danone, the rule of the 80-20. When you are 80% in agreement with something, accept that you can forget the other 20, because if not, you continue to argue on something and you never reach the point to take a decision. 80% is enough. 20% is the remaining to give confidence that this is the right decision. This is another good one.
Yeah, that's a good one. And so there's a lot in what you said. So I want to unpack some things because I feel that this is when the rubber hits the road, right? Which is how can we make this more real? And for the people that are joining us, maybe some practical ideas. So I think first you mentioned something that I feel also I've seen it a lot with my clients, which is that maybe at the executive level, we're operating in a way that is different from what's happening in the front line, right? So we may experience the culture, the ways of working very differently from what our frontline employees or our middle managers are seeing. And that's something I see a lot. So as executives, we may be carrying some blind spots in terms of, well, because we feel empowered, and we put ideas forward and we're heard, then we feel that everybody feels the same way. And that may not be the case. Inadvertently, we may be shutting down people, or people may not feel maybe afraid of making mistakes, right? So I think gaining visibility about that frontline employee experience, I think it's key. And to your point, taking whatever we write on the wall and then really putting that forward and asking people, do you really see this? And how do you see it? Makes a big difference. I think, but sometimes knowing doesn't necessarily translate to changing, right? So what has worked for you to kind of seeing people like open the gap, right? Really helping this executive team that is so important in the change process to say, okay, yep, we see the data, we see it, but then we move into action. What has worked for you on creating that conversation?
Don't forget the first step. We have a business strategy. We are adapting, evolving the business strategy. Do we want to ask ourselves if we have the right values, purpose, culture, archetypes to support the business strategy? This is the starting point. The second step for me has been, like you said, asking the people down the stream, 60,000 people in Danone, 100,000 people in Banco Santander, how do you compare the culture we have with the business strategy we need to implement? And then, Terry, there is an element of trust and believing or accepting the feedback. If we really say that feedback is a gift, when you ask thousands of people of your organization, give me a feedback about how do you see the culture we have versus the business strategy. Like I said, the result you have is that they will tell you that 80% is good. You need to focus on what are the frictions in the remaining 20%. And the executive committee, the CEO, have to trust the system. If not, why starting this process? So you know already that it is a failure. So if you trust this information and you take on board the feedback, well, then you start to work on how we can reduce this friction. In both Banco Santander and Danone, we decided that we needed a set of behavior that were for the leaders in particular to tackle the problems that were identified as friction to implement the business strategy coming from the bottom. If you do all these, success is not 100% guaranteed, but I can tell you are in the good pathway.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that having that clarity on the business strategy is key, right? Because that's really the why. Because if not, why are we doing this beyond just trying to do good, right? I think that what's interesting though is that sometimes we don't have that clarity. It's very interesting. With some of my clients, I sit down, and these are very successful companies. So I sit down and I have individual interviews with each one of the leaders, and I said, well, if you have to prioritize between these three things, and they're different parts of their strategy, which one will you put as number one? If you have to select one KPI, what would that be? Is it customer satisfaction? Is it profitability? Is it revenue growth? Just so I can kind of sense where they are. And not surprisingly, depending on where they sit, they may quote different KPIs, right? So having that conversation, not just to say this is our strategy, but then how do we together make this happen? I think that's the missing conversation many times. Right?
You are sorry to interrupt you, but you said something that is extremely meaningful. It is not easy to convince business leaders when a company is going well that there is a need of change. And here, if you allow me in 30 seconds, I would like to give the example of a giant company, which is Microsoft. The Microsoft of Balmer was an extremely successful company, super successful. Okay, market capitalization of billion of dollars. They decided to, but it was also known to be a company where every business line was fighting with each other. They changed the CEO, the new CEO put culture on top of all the priorities. The first action of Nadia Satella was the one of appointing a new CHRO and leader of the culture. The first decision. What he did, change management plan, evolving of the culture. The company that was doing very well tripled the market capitalization in a few years, 3 times. So the learning here is that even when a company is doing well, if you do not pull the lever of the culture, you are not tapping in all the potential you have in the company. Microsoft is a fantastic example.
Yeah, that's a great example. I think there's some others, right, of leaders that they kind of saw what's ahead. And I think now, well, with what's happening in the markets, right, and there's a lot of uncertainty, at least here in the US, and I imagine around the world too, because now with our global economies, just kind of the way things are, there's a lot of uncertainty, but also there's a lot of untapped potential, right? And so I think with AI, with the globalization, with the potential changes in the global economy, who knows, right? That could pose a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities. And I think it's very interesting to see how this culture plays a role in this, because depending on how you've been cultivating that culture is how you're going to address this challenge, right? And because one thing that I say is that when we are clear on the kind of culture we want, and we're trying to practice those behaviors, it's like putting on, at Axialent, we talk a lot about mindsets. It's like putting on a new set of glasses, and then suddenly you start seeing things from a very different perspective, right? It's you see situations from a different perspective, because it's a personal transformation at the same time that it's an organizational transformation. So it's a very interesting point. But sometimes crises do distract companies from these efforts, even though they're very well intentioned, and because attention goes somewhere else, right? And suddenly, so have you? What would you say? So maybe for some of the people that are joining us today, what can they do? And knowing that we have maybe some, potentially here some HR colleagues that may or may not sit in that C-suite, but they have influence, or we also have some business leaders. I've seen some of the names here. We have some business leaders too. So what do you do, for example, these days that the markets are going a little bit crazy and there's a lot of uncertainty? What do they do in order to stay on track? What would you recommend they can do?
So let me make a quick comment without being politically incorrect, of course, about what is currently happening in the world. And my comment is about a cultural aspect. Certainly for everyone who has worked in a company, and Axialent is a company, a couple of concepts like if we collaborate, it is better for the business, or if we reach a consensus, it is better than taking decisions that are taken by only one person. I mean, these are things that are universally recognized as element of a good business of success. Well, if you look at what is happening in the world now, it is exactly the opposite. Okay, there are actions that are destroying collaboration and destroying consensus, and we will see. Maybe these tests will tell us that we have been living a life in denial, and this is the model we need to apply. Because I don't believe that this is the model we need to apply. If you look at the organization are microcosms where I always say we as leaders, CHRO leaders, CEOs, CFOs, we have the role of achieving business results for the good of society. And when we cross the door of the company, we forget about the parties we vote or the football team we have. We are there to collaborate with the colleagues to achieve the results we have put in the business strategy. Well, in this specific moment, if we don't want the polarization that is spreading around in all the countries, not only in US, in all the countries, impact the efficiency of the company, we need to remind what is the North Star of our company, the business strategy, the values, why, the purpose we have, and forget about what is happening outside. Saturday and Sunday we will protest or go saying that this business leader is right. But when we are inside the company, we have one common goal, which is the one that is pushing us and asking us to continue to collaborate and to take decisions for the good of our clients. So if there is a suggestion I have for my colleagues, which is absolutely a suggestion linked to the topic we are discussing, is continue to use your organization as a filter to the polarization that is happening outside.
Yeah, I agree with you, Roberto. And it takes courage, right? Because there's a lot of pressure when things suddenly start going, and there's uncertainty, and people probably one direction, and you don't necessarily know how things are going to pan out, right? So sometimes it happened with a client of mine that during the pandemic, they went through very hard times and their business was very hard hit for many different reasons. And they had to they had to put on their crisis mode on, right? Which was very centralized decision making, moving fast without consulting too many people. And sometimes you got to do that, but that's for a particular period of time while you go through maybe a particular situation. But then you have to recognize, well, that period is over, and now we're on the other side, and we need to look at things from a different perspective. And to your point, that our business strategy changes, and we got to think about what's good for us now, right? So, and that all sounds great coming from me. That I see things because I'm on the outside, and I can see some things. But what would you say, or what would be some good questions that you will ask if you were going about this with your fellow, and you see the situation, right? But some people are still not aware, right, of where they are, maybe with very good intentions, where they're operating from. What would you suggest would be a couple of good questions that we can ask those leaders to start kind of gaining their or creating self-awareness? What would you say?
So let's focus on one question, not two, one. Everything we do, so we are talking about cultural evolution or transformation, we can talk about programs of diversity and inclusion, we can talk about upskilling and reskilling, whatever change management program you are managing. The relevant question I would ask to a business leader is this important for our business? Are we doing this because it is a trend, or if we do X, we will have a good impact on the business? If the answer to this question is yes, you need to move on. And let me take the example of diversity and inclusion. In US, there is now an attack to these practices. Right, wrong, I don't have any, so this is, I have a position, but this is not the moment to express my position. The companies that have implemented up to yesterday policies that are policies of equity, policies that put people like female or women at the same level of men when it comes to have a position or have the same salary for the same position, are these things that are good for my business? I would say yes. Are these creating inclusion? Meaning, if you are a CPG, a company providing products to billions of people in the world, which are the society, and you want a replica of the society in your company, implementing these rules of equity, diversity, and inclusion are good for the business or not? Forget about everything else. Forget about what do you think about LGBT. Forget about everything else. Is it good and relevant for the business or not? This is the key question we should ask ourselves in front of every decision, in front of every change management program, in front of every project we are about to launch.
Okay. And yeah, that's a very good point. I think that's a great question. I'm looking here at the chat, and there's a very, I think, two interesting questions, and I would love to hear from you because you lived through this, and I know firsthand at Danone, which Danone has, it's this big brand, but there's many different brands underneath and companies that you have acquired, that the company had acquired over time. So it's not like this monolithic company, right? It's different companies within one, if we want to think about that. So what do you do in those cases? You were at Danone, you were kind of overseeing the umbrella of all the Danone different businesses. And many of these businesses may have very different, or maybe in different moments. So what do you do in order to drive like a cohesive culture change when you're in that situation that there's this variety within the company?
In a good company, we do not have to think that everything should be equal for everyone. This is not. This is nothing to do with defining a culture for a company. There are things that are or should be equal for everyone. For example, our leadership style, the behaviors we expect from leaders, the values we have worldwide, etc., etc. So these are things that if you are in Indonesia or if you are in Italy or if you are in US, should be with little changes, but probably no changes, equal to everyone. And there are things, because of the organization of your company, that can be completely different. For example, in Danone, we had local brands that were representing a big chunk of the business. Well, for the local brands, we were leaving the customer-facing people in the countries developing their own strategy. Eventually, with the reference of the culture of the company, but never interfering with how do you market Aqua in Indonesia, or how do you market this given brand in North Africa. So we need to avoid to confuse the fact that if you are a global company, everything needs to be equal to everyone. And in particular, if you want to separate everything that is in the backbone, so IT systems, culture, processes should be the same because it makes the company efficient. Everything that is customer facing can be and should be locally, because you know that the customer better than anyone else that is sitting in Paris or in New York or in Madrid for Banco Santander.
Yeah, I think, yeah, to your point, it's identifying what are those core things that we want everybody here to exemplify. So for example, is it to put the fish on the table, right? Like you were mentioning, because we want to have the tough conversations, we want to hear from everyone, whether you're in Indonesia or you are in France or you're in Italy, right? So that's what I've seen works best is allowing I always say, what you don't want to have is countercultures, right? You can have diversity of cultures and we can be united, align some values, but we don't want to have countercultures. What we don't want is people that behaviors or expectations that really undermine what we're trying to achieve as a company. So identifying those are key, right? What are those what are the things that are really core to us, aligned to our business strategy, and that may have different flavors in different parts of the world. I think that the other one, and I want to make sure we cover this because it's important. And there's a good question then, Ben, then how do you set a culture benchmark, which I think could be a good one. But before we go there, you mentioned something on the kind of the key steps, getting aligned on the business strategy, making sure then that we have the conversation about what is it that we need to shift or change in order for us to get there. What do we need to preserve? What do we need to evolve? But you mentioned something important, which is then how do we make this real for our people, right? Beyond the executive team, how do we make it real for the people that are in the front line? So assuming we have an executive team that is on board, that really have that desire for change, that see the need for change and are willing to make that shift, then how do you make it real for the rest of the organization? What has worked for you?
Here we come to the point of the methodology. You said at the beginning of this chat that many initiatives of change, or 70% of the initiative of changes fail because, well, one of the reasons why initiative of change fail is because there is no methodology associated, meaning we forget about the critical steps to go through to make sure that the change management process is efficient. One of these is training. So you decide what it need to be changed. Eventually, you ask at the bottom of the organization, you identify the frictions, and you decide, okay, these are the 3 things we need to change. Well, once you have identified what you want to change, you need to cascade these down in both Santander and Danone. In particular, in Danone, we organize massive, very simple trainings to identify what are the new behaviors to tackle the frictions you have identified. So this is part of the methodology. Change management is also made by, I tell you what we have decided together to change and to implement. And then lastly, another good example, always in Danone, we have identified around some of these new behaviors and frictions, examples that were telling people why we have identified these as a friction. This is the example we give you, and this is what we want you to, the way we want you to behave now to avoid that we replicate these issue. So examples that are close to the theoretical, we need to collaborate or we need to simplify. Examples that are examples of our people that tell them, this is what we have done wrong in the past. Let's do this in a different way.
Okay. Yeah, I think that that's a very good point, is that sometimes we define the desired state, right? We say we collaborate effectively, we integrate different perspectives. How many of us probably have written those in culture statements, right? We're open and curious, but then how does that really look like? And in the way we meet, in the way we have conversations, and
Exactly.
and I think that that's when things start being real for people. And if you think about it, when we talk about culture, we talk about culture a lot, but it's really what we expect, how we expect people to behave here. It's like, what do you have to do to fit in, right? And
The exemplarity. When the first time the CEO of Danone said, let's put the fish on the table, well, this became an archetype that everyone started to use.
mhm.
So be exemplary and give the example.
Yeah, and then give them the tools so they can start doing it differently, right? And I think that what's really important about this is that is the consistency, and it's not going to happen overnight, but it takes a while, because we're really shifting the way and we say at Axialent that an organization is really a series of conversations and agreements, right? Because that's how we coordinate our work. It's through agreements on what we're going to do and who's going to do what, and conversations that happen around that. If you think about it, that's kind of how we work and collaborate, and that's where culture lives. It's in those fibers. So to the extent that you can change the conversation, like your CEO at Danone saying, "Let's put the fish on the table." That's the way we change culture. It's like we need to change the conversations, and we need to change the way we do agreements and hold each other accountable. So it's a simplistic way of thinking about it, but it's really what we're talking about here. So I think this is great. I think there's a lot of very good practical advice, and I think probably one thing we're missing is then how do we know if we're making progress, right? Because it's all good. We deploy the training, we put in the recognition program, we put in we invested all this time and effort. We think we're doing the right thing, having different kinds of meetings, etc. But what worked for you in order to see, okay, are we moving the needle or not? What worked for you at Danone and Santander and all the other companies you work with?
So there are many things, but let me give you 3 examples which are tangible KPIs. Let's call these in this way, that things are moving in the right direction. Before doing this, can I tell you that I love your example of an organization is a series of conversation and agreements. I really love this, and million reasons why I love this, but I love this because I associate again this to the polarization we are living in society today. Maybe there are not enough conversations that are happening and not enough agreements, parentheses closed. So 3 KPIs to measure that we are going in the right direction. The number 1 is pretty obvious, business results. If we do a fantastic change management program, if we develop a superlative culture, and the business goes south, well, we are not going in the right direction. So first of all, business results have to demonstrate that they go in the right direction. Yeah. Second KPI, people engagement. You want people to stay, you want people to be motivated. It is the best asset of every organization. Well, if the engagement of your people throughout the change management plan, the cultural transformation is going up, you are going in the right direction. And the third one, attractiveness of the company. If you were a good employer of choice, and after this, with a certain period of time, you are becoming a fantastic employer of choice and people flock to come and work with you, well, you're going in the right direction. So these are the 3 KPIs I would say we need to follow. There is one caveat. If you look at the 3, these are not needles that can change in weeks. And now I'm joining something you said a few minutes ago. Whatever change management plan, whatever cultural change plan, it is not something that materialize and deliver results within weeks or months. One of the most difficult conversations I had with all the CEO I served in my life was the one about, how long do you need, Roberto? Well, I think we all need a few years to move the needle. You don't move the results of the company within weeks. You need some time. You don't move engagement, or you don't move the attractiveness within weeks. We need a reasonable amount of time, sometimes measured more in years than in months. It's a matter of fact. It's a matter of being conscious of this and going through the plan.
Yeah, and I think that that's the part that you mentioned something that is very important, Roberto, because I've seen sometimes that we create false dichotomies, right? In terms of business results and culture, it's like we either focus on one or the other. Or I've seen clients, I work with many clients measuring employee engagement and employee value proposition for many years. And I saw companies with very high engagement and not great business results, right? And you're like, there's something wrong with this equation, right? So it's the 2 things are necessary, right? It's like you need to have the north, but then you need to have the energized people to make it happen. Because if not, it's like having, I always say it's like having a cable without being plugged into the right socket. You have people that want to do the right thing, but they're not focusing on the right levers, right? And that's when the business strategy is faulty, or hasn't been well. Maybe it's great, but it hasn't been well communicated, or people are not kind of bringing it down to their level and their team. So both things are needed, and that's what great leaders do. It's both. So hopefully, I know we're almost at time, but any parting words of wisdom, Roberto, that you would like to share with our audience here, with our fellow executives here that are joining us today?
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation. I would repeat things that eventually I've said as a summary. Start with the business strategy. Nothing that can be a good change management program or a cultural program will be good for a company if it is not linked to what are you trying to achieve with your business. And every time the business evolves, well, ask yourself if you are supporting with the right level, the right cultural fit. Second, ask the bottom. The exemplarity and the commitment of the top of the house is paramount. Without this, you don't go anywhere. But ask the belly of the company, what do they think about what we have as a culture to support the business? You will be surprised with the richness of information you will have through this exercise. Then work on the frictions, transform the frictions into behaviors and leadership behaviors that can help to reduce this friction, measure the KPIs we were referring to, and use this methodology with consistency. You cannot pretend that you invite Axialent to help you to develop this strategy, and 3 months later they leave the room and you forget everything. You need to be consistent and apply the methodology without bending. If not, well, things will tend to return to the past normal, which was not the right one, and you will not change a lot. So these are the pills of wisdom I would like to leave my the colleagues that have attended the webinar today.
Well, those are great. I think that one of the quotes from one of my colleagues, Oseas Ramirez, he has a footer in his email that I stole, which is discipline is freedom. And at the beginning, I was like, discipline is freedom. I always saw discipline as something constricting, right? And then I start understanding, well, what he's really referring to is that when we start being consistent, right, with intention and start creating these habits, it just frees our time to really focus on big ideas, big bold ideas, these new things. So when it's kind of the same with what we're talking about, when we remove the little pebbles that we have in our shoes, some of us carry small pebbles, some are bigger boulders, right? In terms of the way we work together. But when we start removing those, we just can go faster. It's more enjoyable. We can grow, we all grow together, and it's easier. And hopefully the conversation today will inspire some of the people in this call. I know it inspired me to continue to move forward with focusing on this, and also thinking broadly when we're thinking about our business strategy, taking into consideration this important dimension. So thank you so much, Roberto, for joining. I'll take you in your offer to talk about what didn't went well, because those will be very conversations to have. I always have fun. We can call it a failathon, and we can do our little failathon on things that didn't. I know I have a couple of those of things that didn't work out for me. But thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy Italy. And thank you everyone for joining us. And you will be receiving a link with the recording of today's webinar. Feel free to share with people in your network that you feel may be interested in this conversation. And also, I will encourage you to keep the conversation going. So please follow Roberto, follow me and Axialent on LinkedIn. We would love to hear your questions, reactions to this conversation. We're super open to also what would be of interest to you, of future questions that we can have. And also we'll be sending you a resource that we think could be great for you, which is how to create your culture roadmap step by step. So if you're interested in this, it's very much aligned to what we discussed today. Some videos, and also get a template that you can use for facilitating these conversations in your company. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Roberto, and have a great rest of your day.